Hey guys! So in today's video, I wanted to do something that I've been thinking about doing for a very long time, and that is the cheap art supply challenge. Now, I was considering using some cheap art supplies that I already have lying around my house, but I ended up going to the dollar store and purchasing a total of 5 items, each for $1, so it is a $5 challenge. I'm interested to see how this will go. Some of the things I'm a little more worried about than others, but we will see what happens. The first thing I got were these ballpoint pens in 8 different colors. And this is one of the things that I'm the least worried about. Something else I'm not particularly worried about are these markers, and it's a 20 count. Now, as we get down to these things, this is where I start to get a little more worried. I got a 10-pack of colored pencils. Now, colored pencils, some of you may know, the cheaper they get, the harder they actually get to use. The next thing I got are these correction pens, and essentially they're just white out in pen form, and I'm hoping I can use them in exchange for a white gel pen. And the final thing I got, as you can see, I did already open this and cut it down a little bit so I could have a test piece, is a pack of poster board. Now, this was the thickest paper substance they had, and it's still not super thick. One side is super glossy, the other side is not so much as poster board always is. And I'm not completely sure which side of the paper I'm going to be using. With poster board, you tend to use the glossy side, but with these supplies, I don't know if that's what I will want to do or not. So as a result, I'm going to be testing on both sides of the paper and just comparing the two. Now here you can see my 2 little pieces of poster board. I've zoomed in a little bit so you can see. This is the glossy side, this is the non-glossy side, if that's not picking up on camera. So I'm just going to start working my way through these different supplies and testing them out. Okay, that works. Whoa. It's already stuck, that's good. It will not click back. It has refused. Good sign. Ooh. So they don't... What? Are they not intended to clip back? Oh, you have to... What is that? So... if you can see, there's 2 notches. And you have to push down for it to come back up. That's bizarre. Never seen that before. Whoa, the green hates it. Alright, I guess we don't have any green ink. But 7 out of 8 for $1 at the dollar store. Not that bad. I'm just gonna dip it in some water and see if that helps. Sometimes with ballpoint pens they can get... Oh yeah, there we go. So we do have some green ink. Okay. So they work. Now actually, the pigmentation, or the amount that they actually show up on the rough side of the paper, is much better than I expected it to be. Let's get into these markers. So, initial impressions. I don't know why I thought I would get any kind of decent color matching to the actual color on the barrel to the way that they applied, with as cheap as they are, but it's taking it easy on them to say that they don't really look anything like they claim to be. Now, the main reason I thought I would want to use this on the glossy side is because it does create a fairly interesting texture and dries a little bit slower. However, it does look like it reacts fairly well on the other side, and I can use the pencils with it. There is a little bit of the paper pulling up, but I was being fairly rough on it and rubbing over it instead of applying it in a gentle manner, so if I'm careful, I should be able to avoid that. So here are those finished swatches. As you can see, the colors are not particularly vibrant. Let's actually try putting some details in marker over top. Ooh, that's running. Cool. Glad I tested that, because that's completely dry and it's running absurd amounts. Is it dry? Maybe it's just damp. Oh, it works there. See, the problem is there are good and bad things about both of these options. The good things about using the glossy side are the markers work very well on the glossy side, both with simply applying them and the fact that you can draw over the top without them bleeding absurd amounts. It looks like maybe as it dries it gets a little better, but it's hard to tell. Here, it very clearly works. However, the pencils do not very clearly work. They don't work at all. So, we've reached a dilemma. Since it's been a little while since I recorded the first half of this video, I'm not really sure which conclusions I came to as far as which art supplies I was going to be using. So in order to cover all of the bases, I officially ruled out the use of the colored pencils just because on the texture of the poster board, it was pretty much out of the question for me. Perhaps I will do another video using those pencils specifically just on a paper that they stick to a little bit better, even a copy paper. Just something that isn't glossy. I also ended up, as I said, using the glossy side of the poster board. I know that in my test video, I tried out both sides, And near the end of that section, it sort of sounded like I was probably leaning towards using the backside of the poster board, but in the end, I figured it would be kind of a waste to not see what I could do with the glossy side. When it came to the actual execution of this piece, I started out by using the yellow ballpoint pen, and in the end I actually ended up using only the yellow and black ballpoint pens. And maybe in a similar vein to the colored pencils having a video of their own, it might be worth considering using exclusively the markers or exclusively the pens and trying to use as many of the different colors as I can, or, my mind is definitely racing with more possibilities for more pieces. Simply because when I have a new art supply, cheap or not, I like to see what I can do with it, and I don't like to let it go to waste, even if I did only pay $1 for it. But getting back to the piece itself, I did start out with a yellow pen, and I ended up trying to mix a skin tone, and in the end, the skin tone doesn't really look that good. It looks alright. There's something very unnatural about it, and I think it's the brown that caused the problems. If I had a chance to do it over, I probably would have mixed a brown from, maybe even a blue and an orange, as I used primarily those colors in this piece, and it might have tied it together a little bit better. But instead of doing that, I tried to use the brown in the marker set as my jumping off point. And I just used the top lid of a little organizational device that I have, and I colored on it, wet it with water, and used it like a watercolor. And I added oranges and reds, I believe, to this brown, and I was trying to make it feel a little more lifelike, and it did work in some regards, but it still looks a little dead in my opinion. I went in a little bit later with some pink in the cheeks and the nose to try to bring out the life in them, but it definitely looks a little dead. But maybe that can just be part of her story. It's kind of interesting considering the plants that come into play later. An interesting thing to think about. Then after I had used those markers as watercolors, I started to go back in with some line work, and I used the black ballpoint pen to do this. I really wanted to work in a style that is very similar to what I do with any other art materials. I didn't really want to treat them differently because they were cheap. And so that led me to this process of applying the color, the putting down a sketch and then adding marker/watercolor and then adding the line work on top of that. Then I actually went in to further bring out some of the shadows and details with the markers themselves. This was the scariest part about this piece. I wasn't sure if it was going to work. The thing about water-based markers, especially water-based markers that are not necessarily meant to be used for quote-unquote fine art, not that that's what this is, or even my typical work is. The thing about those types of markers is they're very saturated, and so when you apply the color, there's not a lot of give to it normally. And I actually did a test, as I showed in the first part of this video, where I tried to put water over the top of marker that had already been applied to the paper, and it did not want to move at all. When it came down to it, I knew that the colors were going to be very strong if I applied them directly to the paper. And there wasn't really going to be anything I could do to fix that if I messed it up. So I ended up starting this kind of experiment on her hair, because the way I do hair, it's fairly easy to cover it up because I draw a lot of strands in the hair and it segments out pretty well. And I did like the way that it turned out, so I went in to the rest of the piece with the same technique. The only thing I'm a little I wouldn't say disappointed with, but the only thing I hesitate to say is my favorite about the piece is the skirt, and I think part of this is due to the fact that I don't really know how skirts work as well as I should in order to be drawing them. However, I do think that the way the folds of the fabric look with the marker applied directly to it is a little bit off. But that just gives me something else to work on, so I'm not too upset about it. And then after the main figure was completed, I ended up going into the background and adding just a few details. I wanted there to be some kind of creeping vine-like plants with some roots underneath. I wanted there to be a bit of a contrast between the top and bottom. And then, of course, my final details, I came in with the white cover-up. It's whiteout. I don't know what the brand was called, but it was essentially a whiteout pen. And that was rough. It was definitely fighting me a lot and didn't want to be used, but it did work for what I wanted to use it for, which were the highlights. And in the end, I'm actually really happy with the way it turned out. Sure, there are things that I would do differently, and sure, there are things that would have probably turned out better had I been using better materials, but for $4, I really don't think it's as bad as it could be, and I definitely have more options for more things to do in the future with the supplies I have left over. So I hope that this process was enjoyable to you, that you enjoyed the overall structure of this video. I know it's a little bit different than what I typically do, but I had a lot of fun with it. Thank you all for watching. Subscribe if you want, and I will see you guys next time. Bye.